Okay, I'll try to do a quick update. The other video you saw today, I surprised those guys because I just pulled right up and didn't say nothing and just kind of was walking up. And Jammer like came to give me a handshake. Maybe I looked like I was just pulling in, like, man, he's aggressive because I was waiting to make that video. So I didn't say nothing to them. I just walked up and then started that video. There were a few things I hesitated to make one last video, being I'm uploading all those others. There's always things that you go through in life, other things. But as I was reading the Kohler Times, they had a headline, and I read three of the articles, but it says the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick of Texas, blames video games and no religion in schools. Now, the way you coined that, I believe you used the death and the blood of those children for a political motivation. Because I read that article, I talked to a liberal, this is the Texas school shooting. And I don't believe your motivations are ever just or pure. Because you're human. But the way you phrase that, the lieutenant governor blames video games and no religion in schools for the shootings. Now, I read the article of his statements. They said he had a rambling statement. I talked to a very liberal person the other day. They said, you know, John, but with all these video games and all, it's a known thing that our generation who grew up, I used to play the shooting games. I liked them, the Call of Duty or whatever. But it's a known factor that the generation of kids that have enlisted in the military these last 7 or 10 years, the kids had a higher, it was a phenomenon that took place. They were much better at shooting in guns. And that the statistics simply showed, rightfully, that was because they were trained playing the games. And of course, that's a part of training when you learn those things. And the other thing that came to my mind, and so I had a liberal that said the same thing. The other thing that came to my mind, just as I pray about things, I said, I had a sense that a lot of the kids that are engaged in these atrocities, they are familiar with how to go about it, and part of it is video games and violence that our society has in entertainment and all. And I said, but after it happens for real, then they're realizing in some cases, oh, this is real. Not that they don't know they're actually going to go kill somebody, but I believe there's a desensitization that takes place, desensitization. Now, as I read the headline, when you put things in that manner, it immediately causes a rage in people that are on the liberal side, and immediately feeds into this particular person or this side of the aisle, which I'm not on a conservative side of the aisle, but it puts into the other side what ignorance, but actually that does play a role in our society, meaning the violence, the things that the lieutenant governor spoke on. Now, they mocked him in a way in another article, but they also wrote flippantly that Patrick talked about 50 million abortions. You know, if you said 50 million dead children, but because of the Kohler Times and our media, abortions are actually, their definition of that is not dead children, which indeed in late-term abortion, it is dead children. Science, anybody that looked at it. But when the paper prints that a lieutenant governor or anybody also brought up 50 million abortions, to them that term means a wonderful right that a woman celebrates. That's how it's trended. So anyone that has promoted that, which our paper has and the media has, they've promoted a view that 50 million deaths of children are a wonderful right to celebrate. So therefore they have no standing. And they use their bias also to promote that. Now the headline is the Kohler Times politically using the blood of those kids. Make no mistake about it. The death of those kids. Make no mistake about it. And it was only a matter of time before they would do it. Then they had one and two more articles. The other one, Trump's latest tweet has hurled us into a full constitutional crisis. You know, I was listening to some constitutional experts. And anybody that's a viewer of news and geopolitics and all, we've been in somewhat of a constitutional crisis in the sense that even the appointment of former special prosecutors and all, there are guidelines, there are limitations. And what the President Mueller is doing, we're really headed for a constitutional crisis. Eugene Robinson, another, I won't get into him, writes in the Colder Times that Trump's tweet put us into one. No, we are in one. But this is the uneducation of the press. Why are we already in one? Because of roles that prosecutors play, even if it was Ken Starr. They're giving, there's a debate in the country, and there's legal challenges on the particular prosecutions that Mr. Mueller has brought forth already. And the challenges are indeed based upon, has he the authority, or could a Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein deputize somebody to work in that manner to go forth and do things he does? And that is a constitutional crisis. You didn't need the tweet, but the Colder Times is they're so uneducated about just about everything. And they did it here again in the back. Solve the school gun violence anywhere, USA. Now, as I read this one, our governor, Abbott, tasked one of our local principals or school people. I read it briefly, but he included her in the solutions to this thing that's going on in the country. But then as the article went down, they seemed to praise Abbott, but then again, they criticized the lieutenant governor. Patrick's weirdo list, considering how many entrances there are in schools and all. So, if I were to say what the criticism they are giving to Mr. Patrick or others that say, how could we solve it now, knowing within the next 6 months or whatever, knowing that there are guns all throughout our country, legally owned guns. How could we now do something actionable within this next 6 months or so? What about if we did not allow anybody to bring a gun in the school? Meaning, you have a limited entrance. Some of the doors in my high school where I grew up, you couldn't go out or in. But if you had, sadly, if we had to get to a point where we said, you know what, we're going to not only have security and all, but we're going to check everybody that comes into our schools. Metal detector, whatever. Now, that would be a way, because you cannot eliminate all of the guns in this country. So how could you eliminate somebody just getting one somehow, somewhere, and entering the school? You can't do that, to be quite frank. And I'm not saying we should not have strict gun laws. I'm just saying the reality is, if you said, what could we do like tomorrow if we had the power? We'd say, you know what? Everybody that enters that school building is going to be checked, like when you're getting on a plane or whatever. That's actionable. Now, why would maybe some like the Colder Times or others, which some are against it, some say no. We don't want to have the hardening of the targets, meaning we don't want to check everybody, and they have their reasons, and they will fight against that, maybe for 20, 30 years. And you could pass a lot of gun laws, but there's still going to be guns in the society because of the way our Constitution, Second Amendment is. And say if somebody else got a gun, went into the school tomorrow and shot a bunch of people, and say if one point was, let's make sure nobody enters the building with a gun. The Caller Times, in that opinion piece, said, well, he was a student. Therefore, if you simply tried to prevent outsiders from going in, students with guns can go in. But say if everybody got checked, no, we don't want that. I sincerely wonder if that side in this debate in this country even wants to solve it. You should have never put a title this soon after. I read Mr. Patrick's statements, and he basically, and you contradict yourself. Paul said that's what the false prophets did, those who were not speaking truth. Because then, after all of that, you had an article, guest editorial, shooting shows pathology in society. We must fight it. Look how ignorant this paper is. I could go through those other articles that they criticized, Mr. Patrick or anybody who says there's a problem in society. And then they have an article that says the shooting shows it's a pathology in society that we must fight. I wonder if they understand that. And I know you guys watching this understand that. I don't think anybody would say, we're going to put all the blame on video games. Or all the blame. What Mr. Patrick was saying, I read the statement, was there's a breakdown in society. In society. The critique of Mr. Patrick was, well, this child, this young man who did this tragic shooting had a father. Therefore, the problem is not father. No, the overall statistic is broken homes, fatherless homes, high crime rate. So you're not looking for solutions. You're not looking. And the way you had that title, that the governor blames video games and no religion in schools. You know, the young man from that school who had to give the speech at the end of the year, whatever they refer to it as, he said, I read it, and the Caller Times had it printed, but I could tell. He said, my speech obviously is now going to be changed at the end of our school year because of this tragic thing that took place. He said, God showed me to change it. And then he said, God told me to say this. And so the young man from the school, one of the survivors, said, God showed me as a believer that I am going to speak about God. Now, would you criticize that young man, the survivor of the shooting? I bet you want to criticize him. Would you say the ignorance of that young man to say that somehow God showed him? There are solutions to the problem. One of them, the most actionable one you could have. They criticize this. The one I'm giving you. We can't get all the guns out of our society tomorrow or next month. Even the legal ones. We cannot prevent some kid from some school somewhere, even if he's a student, from grabbing a weapon from his father. But I'll tell you what we can do. We can make sure, as much as possible, that no student or person or anybody gets into that school with a weapon. And some on that side of the aisle don't want that solution. And it makes me wonder, are you fueling? I would be for any more stricter gun control, but in this case, it seems like it wouldn't have helped. But we do make sure you don't enter in a federal courthouse or a regular courthouse. We do make sure there are many buildings where you cannot enter with a weapon unless you're an officer or a guard. Our courthouse, many establishments have it. And you say, John, I never really thought of that. Some might not have. Say, why don't we do it? The other side of the aisle fights that. They fight that. So it just makes me wonder, I would be for stricter gun control. I'm not against it. But you cannot eliminate, because of our Constitution, you cannot eliminate guns from the U.S. Therefore, you cannot stop a student sometime, somewhere, accessing one and going into the school, unless you harden the targets. Meaning, you say, you know what, we have a few entrances to these schools, and at these entrances, we're going to have a guard at each entrance. Sure, it'll cost money. Is it worth it? And then we're going to have the detectors. And you come in, sadly, guys, this is where we're at as a society. It was a disgrace that they put that in there. It's a disgrace that, in essence, they said the conservative Christian is a simpleton who blames it on video games and religion. Yet, if you read the article, he's saying, if you will, there's a pathology or there's a problem that's deeper in our society. And they mock that, and then one of their answers is we must recognize the problem of that. I would just say at this stage, I knew it would only be a matter, I hesitated to make this last video because I'm still uploading. But at this stage, this is a symptom. It's not just the color tones. Not only are they part of the huge problem in the country, most of the country in this thing that we're caught up in this thing where even honest Democrats, Mark Penn, I think a former Clinton, honest viewers of Constitution and everything else, if you looked at some things that have gone on, you should say there's a problem. They don't want to say it. They don't want to say it. And the majority of the country, there was a poll done, 50-something% of people in this country believe there's a political motivation, obviously, behind what's been going on in this country about the whole Russia spies and all this. So if you have 50% of people, the ratings of CNN, I think, went down 20% from this time last year, though they pushed this narrative that most of the public is now seeing stuff. But the media, they have a narrative they want to push. And I will say to you, because of the way those few articles I quickly critiqued, and that one simplistic headline, the governor blames video games and no religion, I would say the Caller Times has used the blood of the dead kids for their own political goals.